Hi, I'm Mike Sullivan, State Conservationist for the Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Arkansas. We help people help the land. We provide technical and financial assistance to agricultural producers and rural communities to help them address natural resource concerns. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about irrigation. We'll be talking about different types of irrigation systems today and how you can keep money in your back pocket and save water.
Multiple irrigation systems can be used for the same crop, because when you're looking at irrigating, predominantly you're looking at your rice crops, you're looking at your soybean crops, you're looking at your corn crops. Those are the crops mainly that we're looking at irrigating. When looking at the appropriate irrigation system, you want to first look at what type of soil you have, because the soil has a lot of meaning behind what you're going to do and how efficient you can be with it.
What furrow irrigation is where you actually lay the pipe out, you poke holes, and it literally goes down a furrow. In determining furrow irrigation, mainly is going to be the crop. The soil type, what it'll determine a lot of times is how often or how long you need to irrigate it. Your heavier clay soils hold water better, so you'll irrigate them, not quite as often as you would a sandy soil. Today we're standing in a cornfield. About 2-3 weeks ago, we laid out the poly tubing. We had some time, so we went ahead and filled them up with water. Depending on how long the rows are and how much pressure we need to build up on the pipe will determine what hole size we determine. Also, there's a program we can use called Pipe Planner. We can go in and tell it how much our well's pumping, how long the rows are. It'll even go in and tell you, you need to do 10 rows on your short rows, and then it'll tell you how to step them up to bigger holes so they all water efficiently out at the same time. Diesel fuel's not cheap, and that's what it takes. This particular field's run off of a turbine well by diesel. So if we're just letting water run out the bottom, we're not being very efficient or very mindful of our aquifer and the water we're trying to use to make our crops. Flood irrigation is where you put a flood on a field. Depending on different crops, particularly rice, you hold a flood most of the year. The field behind me today is a 0 grade rice field, which means it has no fall, it's flat. You dig interior ditches for drainage, you pump it up, you don't have to have any levees. What would be considered a precision level field is where you see a field that has levees or dikes. We have a levee plow or a levee squeezer that we use to pull the levees. They're on every 3/10. And then if it hasn't been leveled and you see levees, that's why you see the levee meanders all over the field, because it's following the grade, the contour of the land. Just like topo map lines, it's basically the same thing, but they're 3/10 apart there too. In those cases, you have to put in a levee gate, and then you just adjust the levee gate to hold the depth of the water you want. And in some cases, we'll flood irrigate beans, but we try to get the water on really fast and off really fast. So they'll pull levees. They generally put those on 3 to 4/10. They'll turn the water on, and as soon as it gets that levee full, we knock it down or take a shovel and dig holes. And we just try to move the water across the field as fast as we can, because if you do leave water on beans too long, you can damage and kill them with the water standing too long, because that cuts the oxygen off to the roots. Through NRCS, there's lots of different irrigation management practices you can follow. This particular field here is signed up in what's called AWD, alternate wetting and drying. It can be very simple to very complex, and the payments are according. Very simple has a lower payment. The more complex you get and the more you're willing to record and data to keep up with, the higher the payments will be. What we're looking at in the background behind us today is a pivot running. A lot of times the determining factor whether you'll use a pivot or not is how much rolling terrain there is. In the Delta, we don't use pivots a lot. Offshore ground has a good general slope from top to bottom, so we're able to use furrow irrigation. It's much more efficient for us. We can get the 2 inches of water on that we need in a timely period. In the Delta, we're so hot and so humid. Between evaporation and different things, we lose a lot with pivots. They're not as efficient. They're very expensive to operate, but there are situations where that is the only option to use as a pivot. To achieve a uniform pattern, you'll have to pick the appropriate nozzle you need for the crop you're irrigating, and then they just set the pivot to, if they want a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 1 inch, equivalent to rainfall. And most time that's to determine is you want the pivot to be able to make one full circle in 5 to 6 days. The pivot behind us you see is an electrical pivot as far as the way it moves. You've got a power unit that's got a generator off to the side that's belt driven. It creates electricity to generate the motors at each tower. The computer knows that if you're putting out 1 inch, it needs to go this fast. The wheels on the end of the pivot have to turn a lot faster than the wheels next to the head of the unit because of a circle. The outside of the circle turns faster than the inside of the circle. So it's pulling groundwater up, sending it down the tower and out through the sprinkler heads. Through NRCS, they can help determine the cost of a pivot versus the cost of leveling and which one's going to weigh out better for you long term with the repair and maintenance of a pivot versus maybe even having to build your soil back up to be back productive, depending on how deep of a cut you have to make to land level to be able to use furrow or flood irrigation.
For our beginning farmers that are coming into our office and looking at technical assistance, we also have financial assistance that is available through the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. Through the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, producers can apply for practices to enhance their operation, regardless to if it's an irrigation operation practice that they're looking at or looking at cover crops or various other practices depending on what the resource concerns they are trying to address on their operation. So as you go in and visit with NRCS, it's an opportunity to look at where you are and where you're trying to be through conservation.
Thank you for joining us today. If you'd like more information, please contact your local district conservationist.